Hey guys, I hope you're doing well and welcome back to another video. Now, to me, one of the most interesting time periods of the OT is the year gap between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And luckily, the canon comics have been covering that chunk in the timeline for the past few years. And since The Empire Strikes Back is my favorite Star Wars movie, I thought it would be fun to put together a compilation of videos I've made about Luke, specifically covering what he did after The Empire Strikes Back. I hope you enjoy it. In the aftermath of his duel with Darth Vader on Cloud City, Luke Skywalker was left physically and emotionally scarred. The shocking revelation that Vader was his father, Anakin Skywalker, shook Luke to his core, filling his mind with uncertainty and disrupting his connection to the Force. Plagued by feelings of doubt in regards to his destiny and resentment for his Jedi Masters who had lied to him about his parentage, Luke questioned what his next steps would be. The canon book Skywalker, A Family at War explains Luke's traumatic reaction and thoughts immediately after the duel. While Bacta soothed Luke's cauterized wound, no remedy could ease his mind, which lingered on the emotional torment occasioned by Darth Vader's confession. In those moments, Luke felt even more lost and confused than he had in the cave on Dagobah. Aboard the Falcon, he could feel Vader encroaching upon his mind. For a time, Luke suffered through the tangled mess of his own noble instincts, Vader's insidious proposal of shared power, and Kenobi's evasive story of Anakin's demise. Luke knew that he couldn't trust anything Vader said, and yet, searching his feelings, he was hard-pressed to reject the idea. Mentally exhausted, he searched for answers in the Force. He called out again to Obi-Wan, wondering over and over, if Vader spoke the truth, why Obi-Wan hadn't revealed the dark secret of his parentage. When Luke tired of calling for Obi-Wan, he reached out to Master Yoda. He felt certain that the Jedi could hear him, sense his pain, maybe even see what had become of him. However, Yoda too remained silent. It was enough to make Luke want to quit his Jedi path altogether. At around the same age Anakin had been when he became Darth Vader, Luke felt abandoned by the Jedi he had trusted. He was also prey to a nagging fear that, if what Vader had told him was true, then all hope might be lost. If Vader was right, first Obi-Wan and then Yoda had lied. And Luke couldn't puzzle out why they would withhold such a momentous truth from him, except to manipulate him into doing their bidding. Which brought Luke to a startling conclusion. The Jedi were no better than the Sith. Their intentions may have been noble, but their execution was seriously flawed. The light was no stronger than the darkness, and both could bring a man to ruin. If he couldn't be a Jedi, as Obi-Wan had promised, Luke wondered what he would become, with his singular combination of Force abilities and unchecked emotions. For a time, Luke retreated into himself, cutting himself off from the Force altogether. Eventually, after returning to Cloud City to search for his lightsaber, yet choosing not to recover the weapon, Luke found himself drawn to an alternate path, one that diverged from the challenges immediately facing the rebel cause. He was more determined than ever to discover the mysteries of the Force and become a Jedi, but with an important caveat. He no longer wished to follow in his father's footsteps. He no longer even wished to hold Obi-Wan in the same esteem. He sensed that a different road, all his own, lay before him, leading him to do better than those who had come before. Through the Force, he felt the first glimmer of knowledge, something beckoning him toward a destiny that was neither tied to the Jedi of the Republic, nor bound to his father's wickedness. After his duel with Darth Vader on Cloud City, Luke was left haunted by the revelation that Vader was his father. The truth of his parentage shook Luke to his core, causing emotional conflict that disrupted his connection to the Force. In the aftermath of Vader's confession, Luke was forced to accept that Obi-Wan and Yoda had lied to him about his father. These challenges would plague Luke as he and the other rebels faced a firefight immediately after leaving Bespin, where Luke performed one of his most powerful feats in the Force. His thoughts during these events are explained in the 2020 Star Wars comic series and the canon book Skywalker: A Family at War. After being rescued by Leia, Lando, and Chewie, Luke was informed that Han had been taken by Boba Fett. Leia assured him that they would do everything they could to rescue Han, and she asked Luke what had happened back on Cloud City. With a vision of his hand being severed flashing in his mind, Luke told her that he had reached out to Obi-Wan with the Force and received no response. Leia assured him that even if his masters didn't respond to him, he was strong enough to find his own path, and then she declared that they would be returning to the Rebel fleet. Leia stated that she was commandeering the Millennium Falcon in the name of the Rebel Alliance due to Han's absence, and they jumped to lightspeed, heading to the Rebel rendezvous point in the Mid-Rim. There, they encountered the fleet under attack by Imperials, with a massive battle taking place. Entering the battle, Leia was determined to distract the Imperial forces, creating a hole in their blockade big enough for the Rebel fleet to escape. At the sight of the Falcon, perhaps now the most famous ship in the Rebellion, an entire squadron of TIE fighters engaged them. Luke insisted that he had to help in the fight, refusing to sit back even though he was missing a hand. Leia instructed him to take the belly gun, as he had done during their escape from the Death Star. However, without his right hand, Luke struggled to man the gun, and his mind was not clear enough for combat. He saw his hand being severed again, yelling in anger as he thought of Obi-Wan's lie that Darth Vader had killed his father. With the TIE fighters raining down on them and Luke's hand slipping from the controls of the gun, he lost control of his emotions, with Vader's claim of destiny in his mind. Suddenly, as the Falcon's shields were about to fail, Luke reached out with the Force, not even realizing what he was doing, and took control of the entire squadron of TIEs. The fighters began to crash into each other as they all lost control, and Luke destroyed the whole squadron as Leia and Lando watched on and provided additional fire. They had achieved their objective, with the hole in the Imperial blockade now big enough for most of the Rebel fleet to escape. However, Luke was shocked at what he had done. Instead of elation or pride, he felt shame for losing control of his emotions. Shaken by the raw power he had demonstrated and acknowledging his failures, Luke grappled with the lies of his masters, wondering what his path ahead contained. After losing his hand, his lightsaber, and learning the shocking truth that Darth Vader was his father, Luke Skywalker was left haunted by the ordeal. Recovering aboard the Millennium Falcon, he remained in a daze, overcome with shock at what Vader had told him. Luke told Leia that he had attempted to reach out to Obi-Wan with the Force, but didn't receive an answer. His emotional conflict had left his powers in the Force considerably weakened, confusing and frustrating him. He attempted to reach out to Yoda and became enraged when he heard no answer, cracking a window with the Force. Realizing that he was succumbing to his emotions, Luke began to question his path forward out of fear that Vader's claim of being his father was true. He questioned whether he should continue his Jedi training at all, and if Obi-Wan and Yoda still wanted him as their student. Later, while recovering from his injuries and adjusting to his new cybernetic hand, Luke was approached by Lando. Noticing that Luke was training with a blaster, Lando correctly determined that Luke's abilities in the Force were temporarily complicated, and attempted to persuade him to return to Cloud City. He offered to help Luke find his lost lightsaber if he would convince the rebel leaders to allow their trip. At the mention of his saber, Luke suddenly found himself subjected to a vision through the Force, where he saw a mysterious hooded figure catch the lightsaber as it fell. In the vision, Luke saw glimpses of the past, present, and future, and he saw the mysterious woman residing on an unknown yet distinctive planet. Luke believed that he needed to step away from the rebellion in order to follow the visions, and he thought the Force itself was sending him towards the mysterious woman. He wondered if she could be a Jedi, and could answer the questions that he held after fighting Vader. Using his description from the vision, R2 was able to identify the planet that Luke saw, learning it was called Sorelia. When they arrived, Luke wondered if it was possible that his lightsaber had ended up on this planet somehow, however unlikely that may be. He told R2 that whatever the Force wanted him to do on Sorelia, he would have to just let it happen. Landing near the coastline, they discovered a busy marina full of fishing boats at the piers. Luke spotted the woman that he believed he had seen in his vision, cautiously approaching her and introducing himself. He said that he thought the Force sent him to her, and hesitantly asked if she was a Jedi. Immediately, the mystery woman unloaded her catch of fish, dropping them onto Luke and fleeing in her speeder. Recovering from the diversion, Luke and R2 commandeered a speeder of their own and gave chase across the water. Luke actually enjoyed driving the aquatic speeder, since it was the complete opposite of his experiences on Tatooine. However, due to his inexperience, their speeder quickly capsized on a rogue wave, as the woman ran ashore and fled into a nearby cave. Luke and R2 surfaced in the water, swimming to shore as Luke remarked how much he loved sand. At the mouth of the cave, Luke was reminded of his trial in the Cave of Evil on Dagobah, and he cautiously wondered what could possibly be waiting for them inside, since he no longer had a lightsaber and he had just lost his blaster in the ocean. Taking a step inside, Luke accidentally activated a booby trap, pushing R2 out of the way with the Force just in time. Pressing onward, Luke relied on the Force to guide him, motivating himself by remembering his training with Yoda. He was successful in dodging other traps that lay in their path, until he leapt onto an unstable patch of ground, which crumbled and dropped him into a large pit. Metal bars snapped shut over the pit's opening, trapping Luke inside as bubbling water began to rush in from below. Wasting no time, Luke began attempting to hold back the rising water with the Force. As he did, trying to focus, the woman appeared above him, mocking his attempt to hold back the sea. As Luke strained with effort, she asked him what he wanted and why he had found her. Through gritted teeth, Luke explained again that he had seen her in a vision through the Force and that he was training to be a Jedi like her. She responded that she was not a Jedi, and anyone who wanted to be was a fool. Pressing a button on the wall, she deactivated the trap, causing the water to release as Luke slumped with exhaustion. Removing her hood, the woman complimented Luke on his strength in the Force, saying that he was obviously stronger than she was, and that she could sense he was telling the truth about his intentions. She introduced herself as Verla, and she mentioned Jedi hunters. Luke had never heard of any hunters before, which caused Verla to remark that he was more in over his head than she thought. Verla asked if he ever wondered why there weren't more Jedi in the galaxy, and she assumed that whoever had told Luke about the Jedi didn't mention the Inquisitors or the Jedi Purge. Solemnly, as if mourning the past, Verla told Luke how, at the end of the Clone Wars, Emperor Palpatine took control of the Republic and declared the entire Jedi Order to be traitors. Palpatine issued Order 66, and most Jedi, including Padawans and younglings, died that day in the Jedi Purge. She continued, explaining how powerful Darksiders known as the Inquisitorius were sent out to hunt Jedi survivors, and that they were led by Darth Vader. Distracted by her story, Verla didn't notice R2-D2 approach from behind, and he shocked her into unconsciousness and released Luke from the pit. Much later, she awoke to find herself restrained at a campfire as Luke cooked dinner. Luke introduced himself by his full name, and Verla recognized the name Skywalker, saying that she was aware that was Vader's name before he fell to the dark side. Almost desperately, Luke asked if she knew anything about Anakin. Verla explained that the Jedi Master Farron Barr had known that Anakin became Vader, and told her that Anakin was once a great hero of the Clone Wars, but she didn't know what caused him to become Vader. Focusing again on why he was there, Luke repeated that he saw Verla holding out a lightsaber to him in his vision, and asked if she had one that she was willing to give him. She replied that she didn't, but she did know where he could find one, before insisting that Luke didn't want to be a Jedi. She told Luke that she had been tasked with becoming a Jedi herself by Farron Barr, and she had spent most of her life running from Vader and the Inquisitors before deciding to abandon becoming a Jedi altogether. She warned Luke that the Force was a trap that chewed people up and used them for its own purposes, regardless of light or dark. Verla implored Luke to reconsider becoming a Jedi, insisting that he didn't need to do what the Force wanted him to do, and that the path he was on would tear him apart. While Luke assured her that he understood what she was saying, he reminded her that the galaxy was suffering, and that he needed to try to help no matter the danger. Realizing that Luke could not be deterred from the path of the Jedi, she sent him to an old outpost from the High Republic era located on the planet Tempest, and the two parted ways. Arriving on the stormy, lightning-covered planet Tempest, Luke and R2 made their way to the old Jedi outpost. Some of its spires were crumbled, yet it remained mostly intact, and Luke was able to open the doors with the Force, as the symbol of the Jedi glowed brightly against the stone. Inside, Luke was shocked to see many relics of the past, like a holocron on a pedestal, temple guard armor, and crumbled statues of ancient masters. To his left, Luke noticed a lightsaber resting on another pedestal, and claimed it, announcing that he would indeed become a Jedi with this new weapon. The interior of the outpost suddenly darkened around him, as a flaming specter appeared behind him in the form of the Grand Inquisitor. Though killed long ago, the spirit somehow remained in the outpost. Luke had no idea who this figure was. As the Grand Inquisitor, still engulfed in ghostly flames, attacked, he gloated that he once served the Jedi, then he served Vader, and now he killed anyone who sprung the trap that Vader created. Luke, igniting the yellow saber that was now his, rebutted that he would never kill another Jedi again. The two engaged in a lightsaber duel, as the Grand Inquisitor taunted Luke's abilities and lack of training in the Force. Luke initially found himself overwhelmed, having no experience fighting against a double-bladed saber staff. As the fight continued, Luke drew upon the strength of the artifacts around him, the remnants of the lost Jedi Order, and gained the upper hand. Motivated by what he believed the Jedi once stood for, Luke was able to sever the Grand Inquisitor's hand, and then slash the Spectre cleanly in half, causing him to dissipate in a shower of flames. Returning to the Rebel fleet, Luke told Leia that he had found what he was looking for and more. Leia asked him to show her and the other rebels whatever it was that he had found, as the rebellion itself was on the verge of extinction. Though he was hesitant at first, Luke listened to Leia's insistence, igniting his new saber before the crew, instilling hope and inspiring them to continue the fight against the Empire. In canon, after losing his father's lightsaber on Cloud City, Luke Skywalker briefly took up a yellow lightsaber as he continued to operate as a Jedi Knight. He had found the saber in an abandoned Jedi temple from the High Republic era, and continued to wield it until it was destroyed while Luke and his friends were trapped in a realm called No Space. In a battle with ancient droids that once belonged to the Nile, Luke suffered through both his mechanical hand and his lightsaber being crushed. After his confrontation with his father on Cloud City, Luke's ability to use the Force became strained, and he described it as sometimes feeling like a whisper, and other times feeling stronger than ever before. After the destruction of his yellow saber, Luke was immediately aware that he needed a new weapon, but also that he needed to understand his connection with the Force through training. After he and his friends had escaped from No Space, Luke examined the yellow Kyber crystal of the saber, admitting to R2 that he didn't know much about them at all. At this point, Luke had recovered one of the sacred Jedi texts, but he was disappointed to see that the information it held about Kyber crystals was all philosophy, describing how Jedi would go to Ilum to find crystals. Luke and R2 had traveled to Ilum once, shortly after his duel with Vader, only to find the planet completely under Imperial control. Luke realized that choosing a crystal and building a saber had been a rite of passage for the Jedi of the past. He thought that perhaps Yoda and Obi-Wan had never taught him any of this because he already had his father's lightsaber, but he realized that both that saber and his yellow one weren't really his, since he did not bond with the crystal or build the sabers himself. Igniting the yellow saber, he told R2 that he never felt a connection with the yellow crystal, and that the saber itself had been merely a good tool until now, nothing more. Now that the crystal was cracked, the saber barely worked and was highly unstable. Studying the Jedi text, Luke was frustrated to see that it had no instructions on how to actually build a saber. He realized that the first step was obtaining a new crystal before he could even consider building a new hilt, and the text mentioned other worlds where Kyber could be found. Aside from needing a new saber, Luke also felt like he needed to take control of his own destiny, since his connection to the Force was disrupted and he found it difficult to continue his training. Setting out to find a new crystal, Luke and R2 traveled to Christophsis, which was under Imperial rule but without much of a physical presence. Landing outside a small mining town, Luke hoped to find crystal prospectors eager to sell their inventory. According to the Book of Jedi texts, Christophsis was one of the few places that Kyber crystals could be found. However, they were still incredibly rare and the planet didn't have as much as Ilum. Luke told R2 that trading Kyber was illegal in the Empire, but Lando had told him that there was still an active black market operating on Christophsis. Since the Empire didn't bother mining the Kyber themselves on Christophsis, the local prospectors would sell whatever they found, and Luke hoped to obtain one by posing as a buyer. Handing his broken lightsaber to R2, Luke admitted that his plan wasn't very good, which is why R2 would be his backup if things went south. Entering a cantina, Luke ordered a drink and casually mentioned to the bartender that he was hoping to conduct business. He said that since Christophsis had a reputation for having some of the best gems available, he was hoping to source some rare pieces from the local prospectors. The bartender, very interested, leaned in and asked Luke what he was specifically looking for, and that he could point him in the right direction for a small fee. Luke repeated that he was looking for the rarest crystals, and the bartender quietly confirmed that he must want Kyber. Suddenly, a blaster bolt flew through the bartender's chest as Luke looked around in shock. He watched as every patron in the bar was gunned down by a woman holding two blasters. She quickly dropped them, putting her hands up and asking him what he was going to do about it, and she knew his name. R2 rolled in behind her, and Luke quickly summoned his broken saber, ordering the woman to explain herself. She said that she had just saved his life and introduced herself as Greta. Luke noticed a blaster behind the bar, but was not yet convinced. Greta explained that the rumor that one could simply buy Kyber on Christophsis was a lie. The town really survived because the locals would simply capture anyone who came looking for Kyber and sell them to the Empire. When Luke asked why she saved him, she said that he was a Jedi, maybe the only Jedi. She explained that her and a few others still believed in the Jedi, and she suspected that Luke or another Jedi might come searching for crystals since Ilum was completely occupied. Luke was disappointed with her for killing the people in the bar, even if it was to save him, and he left to go find Kyber on his own. Greta quickly yelled that he was going the wrong way, and insisted that he let her help him. Luke replied that he didn't want her help, since the only thing he knew about her was that she was a killer. Greta explained that she was born on Jedha, and her family were all Falanasi, an order of Force users. When the Empire destroyed Jedha City 4 years earlier, they killed her entire family. She told Luke that when he destroyed the Death Star, he avenged her family's deaths and closed a hole in her heart. She asked him to let her repay the favor. Luke told R2 to go back to the ship and wait for him, and to tell the others where he was if he didn't return. As they sped away, Luke asked Greta about the Falanasi and if they used Kyber crystals themselves. She replied that they didn't, and the Falanasi hadn't been Force sensitive for many generations, but they considered the Force to be a great mystery and wanted to understand it. She told Luke that they were looking for a man named Kawada. She explained that when the Empire built the Death Star, they brought together the best minds who knew about Kyber to design it, and Kawada was an academic researcher that specialized in Kyber. Kawada had fled the Empire when his colleagues began disappearing, and came to Christophsis to hide and study Kyber. They soon found Kawada, who politely asked Luke for his broken saber. When Luke asked why, Kawada began speaking to the numerous Kyber crystals that hung around his neck, explaining that the crystals thought that Luke needed his help. Luke admitted that he did need help, and handed over the saber, which Kawada quickly proceeded to dismantle so he could inspect the yellow crystal. He noted that the crystal was almost broken in half, and he assured Luke that he could somewhat repair it, but he would want something in return. Inside Kawada's laboratory, he noted that Luke's saber seemed to be weirdly built, and Luke explained that both he and R2 had tinkered with it. Kawada chastised him, explaining that fiddling with a lightsaber could cause it to explode. Luke explained that lightsaber maintenance wasn't part of his training, since he had to learn a lot in a little amount of time. Kawada showed him the 5 main parts of the lightsaber: the power cell, the casing, the focusing lens, the emitter, and the crystal itself. He explained that the crystal was the key, and it focused not only the energy from the power cell but from the Force, and that a good connection to the user could allow the saber to feel like it was moving by itself. Greta asked Luke if he had ever felt anything like that, and he replied that he hadn't, with both of the sabers he had owned. Kawada said that was because Luke had found the sabers, he had not chosen the crystals, and they had not chosen him. Luke explained that his first saber had belonged to his father, a great Jedi, which Kawada admitted was better, but still not the same. Examining the cracked yellow crystal, he told Luke that he could somewhat fix it by diverting energy around the cracked part to make it more stable. He then pulled out a red crystal, which was what he wanted Luke for. Kawada said that he had heard there was a way to pull the dark side out of red crystals through the Force, and he wanted Luke to do it for observation purposes. Luke was quick to point out that he had never even heard of anything like that, but Greta interjected that she had. She explained that the Falanasi had their own ritual for cleansing Kyber, which they had offered as a service after the fall of the Sith, and the Jedi Order had asked them to heal as many red crystals as possible. She told Luke that in order for a crystal to be made red, it had to be bled by a dark side user, who would pour their rage, pain, and fear into the crystal, leaving it in scarlet agony. To heal it, Luke would have to do the opposite, by using the light side and his own joy and hope to offset the pain that the bleeding caused. She warned that the process would be difficult, but Luke said that he would give it a try. Sitting down, he began to meditate on the red crystal. He suddenly found himself transported into some terrifying dimension, seemingly a world within the dark side itself. In the distance, he saw his father, Darth Vader, and then the vision flashed out and sent him back into the real world. Kawada eagerly asked Luke what he had seen, with a clipboard in hand. Luke shakily replied that he had seen his father, which caused Kawada to wonder why a great Jedi would be inside a red crystal. Greta insisted that he leave Luke alone, and that he needed to fulfill his end of the bargain. Kawada agreed, but he gave Luke another crystal, one that was clear and raw, and asked Luke to try to connect with it. He assured Luke that the process should be much easier than with the red crystal, and Luke reluctantly sat down again, focusing on the clear crystal. He found himself face to face with Master Yoda. Luke said that he knew this vision wasn't real, but he asked Yoda why he had never answered when he would call out to him through the Force. He said that he had been trying to learn everything on his own and had been hurt, and asked why Yoda didn't help him. Yoda replied that all Jedi must walk their own path, and that Luke must know this or else he would have returned to Dagobah already for more training. He said that Luke must not have truly wanted to speak with him, or he would have. He told Luke that a great decision lay before him that had nothing to do with the Force or the Jedi. It was a decision that Luke needed to make about himself, and until he did, he could not be a Jedi. Luke grew agitated, telling Yoda that he always said so much without actually saying anything. Luke said that he would be fine without Yoda's help, and he said goodbye to his master. After Luke vanished, Obi-Wan's Force Spirit appeared, and Yoda asked for his thoughts. Obi-Wan said that after all Luke had learned, he was still not ready. Yoda replied that he was right, yet Luke had learned much and had still appeared to them, even if he didn't understand what he was doing. He said that when the time came, Luke would be ready. Emerging from the vision, Luke found the crystal in his palm, only now it was green. Kawada handed him the broken saber, saying that while it wasn't perfect, it should work until Luke decided to replace the crystal. Luke thanked him for fixing it, but said that he was leaving and taking the green crystal with him, since he would need to build his own lightsaber one day. Luke also took the red crystal, hopeful that he could learn more and one day heal it. Back at his X-Wing, Luke thanked Greta for her help, saying that he had learned things he never dreamed of. Greta told him that since she had helped him, she felt as though she had fulfilled the debt she owed her family, and would be leaving Christophsis. She asked Luke if he would be returning to the Alliance, and he replied that he would eventually, but holding the green crystal in one hand and the red in the other, he told her that he had some thinking to do. After the events of The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker was left shaken by the revelation that Darth Vader was his father, and the fact that his Jedi Masters had lied to him. Full of resentment towards Obi-Wan and Yoda and receiving no response from either of them through the Force, Luke decided to continue his Jedi training in solitude, searching for lost Jedi temples and artifacts across the galaxy. Using a list of known Jedi sites that R2-D2 stole from the Empire, Luke traveled to the planet Aldalim and recovered a Jedi holocron. To his frustration, the holocron only contained recordings of his own master, Yoda, reciting the very lessons that Luke had already learned on Dagobah months before. Expressing his agitation to R2, Luke recalled the various obstacles he had encountered on his quest to become a Jedi, wondering if he should walk away from the Force altogether. Yet, at R2's encouragement, he listened to the holocron once more, and the recording of Yoda spoke of vergences in the Force across the galaxy. Such vergences were locations where the Force was more sharply focused, such as the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Jeddah, and the living sea of Gazian. With renewed interest, Luke traveled to the Gazian system, noting that it was not in the Imperial database of Jedi sites that they had been using. This gave him hope that they had finally found a place significant to the Jedi that the Empire didn't know of. Landing on the surface, Luke noticed that the Force did feel incredibly strong there, and he stepped onto the strange ground that appeared to be covered in mushrooms. Suddenly, Luke fell through the surface, and once his respirator mask was removed, he inhaled the hallucinogenic spores and was subjected to some sort of vision. He found himself sitting in the red void, accompanied by another man. The man, dressed in white and gold Jedi robes, noticed Luke's lightsaber and summoned it with the Force. However, it was strangely Anakin's lightsaber, the one that Luke had lost on Cloud City. Returning the saber, the Jedi introduced himself as Master Elzar Mann. Elzar asked Luke if he was also a Jedi, to which Luke replied that he was working on learning about the Force. Elzar said that even for a Jedi Master, learning about the Force never stopped. The two of them suddenly were sitting on Ahch-To, the birthplace of the Jedi Order and the very planet that Luke would one day exile himself on. Luke asked if he was experiencing a vision, as it felt different than any other time the Force had spoken to him. Elzar explained that he was not a vision. The planet Gazian was a gigantic living organism, and also a living vergence in the Force. Gazian took an imprint of the minds that visited it, and could reproduce them, exactly as they were at the moment they first arrived. So Luke was speaking to Elzar Mann as he was when he came to Gazian, hundreds of years before. Elzar stated that he had come to Gazian for answers after experiencing a dark vision, and although he had no knowledge of what had happened after he left, he assumed that things did not go well for the Jedi Order since Luke knew nothing about the Jedi. Luke stated that he knew there was once a republic, but the galaxy had become an empire, and that they were in the midst of dark times. Elzar realized that he must have been long dead, and he asked Luke what other Jedi he had met. Luke replied with the names of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, and Elzar replied that Yoda was old even when he knew him, and he was glad that the old Grand Master was still alive. Luke said he knew of another Jedi named Anakin who had fallen to the dark side, and Elzar said that happens sometimes. Seeing how difficult things were for Luke, Elzar showed him what the Jedi Order looked like in his time, explaining how the Jedi were once truly connected in the Force inside the temple on Coruscant. Elzar said during his time of the High Republic, it was a golden age for the Jedi, around 800 years after they had ended the rule of the Sith Lord Darth Bane. Luke was overwhelmed by the information, and this was the first time he had ever heard of Darth Bane. He explained the struggles he had gone through in his training, and how after training with Yoda, he had been alone. Luke said that if things went wrong, he could become a monster, thinking of Darth Vader. Elzar replied that the Force was the greatest power in the universe, able to connect Luke with others, send his mind to the past or the future, and much more. So why would he think that learning to use it would be easy? Elzar explained that once he realized he could unlock the powers of the Force by learning and working to get deeper, he could help more and more people as he learned more. He said the Jedi were something special, but that wasn't always the case. The Order tended to be whatever it needed to be for a particular time. Sometimes they were warriors fighting evil. Sometimes teachers bringing knowledge to the galaxy. Sometimes they governed, sometimes they studied the Force and its mysteries, and sometimes they explored. And sometimes the Jedi were carved down to almost nothing, leaving those who were left to bear the responsibility of being one last bit of light in a galaxy filled with endless darkness. Elzar said that judging by how Luke described the galaxy of his time, that must have been the kind of Jedi Order Luke was born into. He told Luke that he didn't have to be a Jedi. The Order was a framework for understanding the Force and using it safely to protect life and the light, but there were many other paths. But Elzar said that if Luke did want to be a Jedi, the imprints of other Jedi who had visited Gazian would be there for him, such as Yoda, Qui-Gon Jinn, Avar Kriss, and more. Luke said that he appreciated everything Elzar had told him, but he needed to go, and he was confronted by his own imprint that would always remain there. Coming back into his physical form, Luke ignited his yellow lightsaber and retrieved his respirator mask, only to see numerous corpses and skeletons of those who had never left the living sea. One such skeleton gripped an ancient Jedi text, which Luke took as he leapt from the sea with the Force. What's going on, guys? Today I have a very special story to share with you from the current Star Wars comic series. The last two issues, number 42 and 43, are all about Luke and still take place between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. At this point, Luke has already obtained his green Kyber crystal, but he hasn't built his own saber yet. He's still using the yellow lightsaber he found in an ancient Jedi outpost. If you're not caught up or have no idea what I'm talking about, I do have a video telling the story of him getting his green crystal, so I'll put a little card to that if you want to watch it first and then come back to this one. Anyway, Luke has been continuing his training and he went to Christophsis to learn about Kyber. There, he bonded with a raw crystal and it turned green, and he also obtained a red crystal that had been bled in the past, and he was determined to learn how to heal it. On Christophsis, Luke met a Falanasi woman named Greta. For those of you who don't know, the Falanasi were a religious order of Force users that knew a lot about Kyber crystals. Now, Luke tracks down Greta again, as he needs her help to heal the red crystal. The story begins with a pretty cool moment as Luke surprises Greta and she shoots him with her blaster, thinking he's an intruder. Instinctively, Luke deflects the blaster bolt with the Force, without really knowing how he did it. Luke explains that he needs her help to heal the red crystal he obtained on Christophsis. Luke had already tried once before to heal it, and he was sucked into a vision inside of it and saw an ancient Sith Lord. Greta explains that she doesn't know how to help him, and the Falanasi haven't healed crystals for 1,000 generations. Luke explains that he knows he'll have to fight the Sith eventually, and he had seen them inside of the red crystal. By going back and seeing the visions again, he hopes to learn more. At this point, Greta's aunt Phys comes in and drops some amazing lore about the Force and Kyber crystals. Luke tells her that he needs to understand how to heal Kyber and how to bring something lost in the dark side back to the light. So Luke's real motive here is to learn how to redeem Darth Vader, which I think is incredible. If you guys can't already tell, I love this story. Anyway, Phys explains that healing Kyber is an exercise in empathy, and it's dangerous and exhausting. Red Kyber crystals are created when a darkside user pours every drop of their pain and anguish into it. Each person's pain is different, so every single red crystal is unique and requires a particular journey through the maze of memories and pain to heal it. In order to heal the crystal, one needs to understand that pain. She warns Luke that he could also be lost to the pain when he tries to heal it, meaning he could be trapped inside the crystal forever. When a Force user creates a red crystal, the terrible events in their past are encoded into the Kyber's very substance. The experiences, the memories, and the hurt from the user remains inside the crystal, and that's what Luke sees when he meditates on it. Phys tells Luke that when he enters the vision in the crystal, he won't be able to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. Phys and Greta agree to help him, and they say they'll attempt to pull him out of the vision if they can, and Luke begins to meditate on the crystal. Immediately, he is dropped into a dark vision of a red fortress and arrives in the hall of the ancient Sith Lord he had seen before. The Sith says that Luke is not welcome, and he ignites his yellow lightsaber to defend himself, but he is surrounded by an entire crowd of Sith. Luke does manage to push some of them out of his way, showing how much stronger he has become in the Force, but the Sith Lord manages to knock him unconscious, and Luke is quickly imprisoned in a jail cell. Luke is confused about when the vision is taking place, and the Sith Lord cryptically states that it is simply happening now. Luke insists that he is there to help heal the Sith Lord of his pain, to bring him back to the light, but the Sith is not interested and instead has his guards beat Luke. He says the only thing a Jedi can do there is suffer forever. Luke is left beaten and bruised in his cell, and the Sith Lord remains to gloat about how no one leaves their pain behind, and agony is what makes someone who they are. Luke replies that he is there to help, and the place they are in only exists because some version of the Sith Lord was badly hurt and left an echo of his pain. The Sith Lord says that pain never stops, and he notes that Luke's hand was severed and makes his mechanical hand disappear. The Sith Lord says that loss can either be a prison or a weapon and ignites his red lightsaber. He plans to create an even more painful place within the crystal, using both his pain and Luke's pain, and he leaves Luke alone in the cell. Luke thinks of his severed hand, and he's able to calm himself and force push his way out of the cell. Next to him, he sees a small cradle with a crying baby in it. Stepping into the next cell, he enters another vision and sees the Sith Lord as an infant, wrapped in a red blanket on the lap of their dead parent. Luke takes the baby, telling them that it will be alright and they are not alone. It's clear now that the entire prison is simply a collection of the Sith Lord's painful memories, and Luke says that he will heal them one step at a time. Now we see a beautiful moment of Luke walking through the Sith Lord's entire life, helping them through their darkest and most painful moments, telling them that they will heal, that pain is not the only path, and he will show them how to let go. Suddenly, the Sith Lord appears behind him and insists that they don't want to be healed, and they won't let Luke make them weak. Luke replies that being healed doesn't mean that you're weak. Luke goes to ignite his lightsaber, but he is shocked to see that not only is he holding his father's lightsaber that he had lost, but the blade is now green. The two engage in a duel, and Luke is able to disarm the Sith, but doesn't strike them down. He simply tells them that all paths lead in both directions. However, the Sith Lord subjects Luke to a new vision of Luke's own pain, and Darth Vader appears behind him. Luke is at first terrified to see his father. The vision shifts to Cloud City, but Luke is much more powerful than he was before, and he's able to leap over Vader and escape from the bridge. Inside the corridor where he had dueled Vader, Luke sees his own memories, all of his pain, going back to the moment of his birth. Vader appears before him again and says there is no escape. Luke replies that that is true, there is no escape, and he knows he will have to face his father again. It is both of their destinies. But Luke deactivates his saber and steps closer to Vader, saying that he knows almost nothing about him. But Vader must have a place like this inside of him, which means that he didn't begin life as Darth Vader. Once he was someone else, and Vader suddenly takes the glowing white form of Anakin Skywalker. Luke reaches out to his father, saying that all of Vader's good and bad is still there inside of him, and no one is beyond help. Luke touches his father's chest, and with a loud hiss, the vision shifts again, and Luke sees the same fortress, but now it is clear and healed. Waking from the vision, Luke sees that he has successfully healed the Kyber crystal. He tells Greta and Fies that he didn't learn much about the Sith, but he did learn a lot about himself, and he pulls the green Kyber crystal from his pocket, saying that will have to be enough. When Luke Skywalker abruptly left Dagobah so that he could save his friends, he promised Master Yoda that he would return to finish his Jedi training. However, Luke didn't return to Yoda until the events of Return of the Jedi, which takes place a full year later in the timeline. This means that Luke didn't have any other training under Yoda, so he must have been training himself during that time. So why didn't Luke return to Yoda right away? He was brutally defeated by Darth Vader on Cloud City, losing his hand and his lightsaber, so what caused him to avoid returning to his master? The answer to this question is provided in the canon book Skywalker: A Family at War, revealing Luke's drastic emotional turmoil after learning that Vader was his father, and how it skewed his perspective on the Jedi, the Sith, and his relationship with his masters. After Cloud City, Luke was distraught by Vader's shocking revelation, with his connection to the Force fractured. His mind was cluttered with his own noble instincts, Vader's proposal of shared power, and Obi-Wan's evasive story of Anakin's supposed death. Mentally exhausted, Luke pleaded with his masters for answers through the Force, wondering why they would have kept the truth of his parentage from him. Luke was sure that Obi-Wan and Yoda could hear him, and maybe even sense his pain, but neither of them answered. Struggling to control his emotions, Luke felt conflicted. A rage blossomed within him, not unlike the anger that had plagued Anakin's mind decades earlier. Luke felt abandoned by the Jedi that he had trusted. He began to believe that if Vader spoke the truth and was his father, then all hope might be lost. Luke couldn't understand why Obi-Wan and Yoda had lied to him, and he began to believe that they had simply manipulated him into doing their bidding. This brought Luke to a startling conclusion, that the Jedi were no better than the Sith. Their intentions were noble, but their execution was flawed. The light was no stronger than the darkness, and both could bring a man to ruin. Luke wondered what he would become if he could not be a Jedi Knight. Shortly after, Luke was granted an epiphany as his connection to the Force was healed. After returning to Bespin to find his lightsaber, he ultimately decided not to retrieve his father's weapon. He found himself drawn to an alternate path, one that was entirely his own and diverged from the immediate problems of the rebellion. While he was more determined than ever to become a Jedi and unlock the mysteries of the Force, he no longer wished to follow in his father's footsteps. He didn't even hold Obi-Wan in the same esteem anymore. He sensed that his own path would lead him to do better than those that came before him. Through the Force, Luke felt the first glimmer of knowledge, something beckoning him toward a destiny that was neither tied to the old Jedi of the Republic or his father's darkness. Thus, Luke set out on his own, opting not to return to Yoda. By the time he entered Jabba's palace, Luke was a different man, more knowledgeable in the Force than ever before, and wielding a new green lightsaber that symbolized his growth toward becoming a full Jedi Knight. As the rebellion prepared an assault on the second Death Star, Luke knew that he was approaching his final Jedi trial, confronting his father again. He knew that it was the final step to set him firmly on course to become the first member of a new Jedi Order, the next generation of Peacekeepers. Even without a master to guide him for the past year, Luke had found a way to reconcile himself with what needed to be done. When he did return to Dagobah, keeping his promise to Yoda, Luke reflected on how much had changed since he had begun his training there. He had walked a solitary path toward understanding what the Jedi Order had once been and his family's role in its destruction, piecing together what he could from ancient relics and his own intuition. The man who returned to Dagobah was very different from the impatient young rebel that had crashed into the swamp a year before. For Luke, his final meeting with Yoda in life forced him to come to terms with the truth of his identity as the son of Vader, and his own anger over what he saw as the Jedi's deception. Luke had come to the conclusion that Yoda and Obi-Wan had kept the truth about Vader hidden to ensure that he would kill his father without hesitation. That assessment suggested a degree of manipulation that was completely unacceptable, and Luke saw it as a serious moral failure. But while Yoda did confess the truth, validating Vader's revelation, he made one critical point of clarification that partially mended Luke's wounded perception of the Jedi. Yoda and Obi-Wan had never meant to keep the truth from Luke forever, but they had hoped to wait until he was fully trained and could bear the burden of his destiny. Obi-Wan believed that the revelation was severe enough to be considered a Jedi trial on its own. This new information partially relieved Luke's resentment towards his masters, and he accepted that he had fled Dagobah on a foolhardy quest to prevent the future. Luke found that his initial feelings of vengeance toward Vader were now replaced with compassion. He did not condone his father's actions, but he was able to pity him, and, like his mother on her deathbed, Luke clung to the belief that there was still good within Anakin.